The machine beeped 3 times, and I just stood there, staring at the screen like it had said something in a foreign language. Insufficient funds. I pressed the button again. Same thing. I stepped back from the ATM and let the January wind hit me full in the face, because I needed something real to hold on to right then. I'd been standing outside that drugstore on Route 9 for I don't know how long, my prescription still sitting behind the counter, and my debit card suddenly worth nothing. I'm 67 years old. I worked 39 years for the County Water Authority. I ate lunch from a cooler. I packed myself every single morning so I could put money away. I didn't take vacations. I drove the same truck for 11 years, and in the time it took me to get from home to that pharmacy, someone had emptied my checking account down to $12. I knew before I even called the bank. I think some part of me had known for weeks and just hadn't let myself say it out loud. My son's name is Patrick. He's 41, and I say that only because people always assume when a story starts like this, it must be a daughter. It's not. It's my boy. The one I coached Little League for. The one I sat with in the hospital waiting room when his daughter Ivy was born, both of us crying like we'd never seen anything so perfect. Patrick came back into my life about 8 months before all this happened. He'd been living in Columbus with his wife Renee. They separated, she got the house, the kids mostly went with her. He showed up at my door on a Tuesday with 2 duffel bags and a look on his face I recognized from when he was 17 and had wrecked my Chevy. I let him in. What else was I going to do? He got himself a job at a warehouse about 20 minutes out, said he was saving up, said he just needed a few months to get back on his feet. I told him to take the guest room and not worry about rent until he was steady. My sister Maureen called me the week after and said, "Don't do it, Harlan." I told her she was being harsh. Patrick was still my son. What I didn't know then. What I found out later from Renee, who had more grace than I deserved, was that Patrick had lost the warehouse job after 3 weeks. He never told me. He was leaving the house at 7 in the morning and coming back at 6, and I never thought to question it, because why would I? He was my son. The account he drained wasn't my main checking. It was the one I kept for medical expenses. The one I'd been building for 6 years after my cardiologist told me I'd need a valve replacement eventually, and that I should plan for it. $64,000. I know how that sounds. I know people spend that on kitchen renovations. But I'm a man who grew up with parents who couldn't afford the dentist, so $64,000 in a savings account was the closest thing to security I'd ever felt in my life. Patrick had found the routing number on an old check I'd left on the kitchen counter. He'd opened a new account somewhere online and transferred it over 3 weeks in small enough increments that the bank's fraud alert didn't flag it. The last transfer went through on a Thursday. By Friday, he was gone. Left his key on the table and didn't even leave a note. That's the part that keeps me up some nights even now. Not the money. The no note. My granddaughter Ivy was staying with me that week. She's 16, sharp as a tack, the kind of kid who reads the room before she even walks into it. Renee had dropped her off the previous Sunday because Ivy had a school project she was working on with a partner who lived 20 minutes from my house, and it was just easier. Patrick knew Ivy was there. He left anyway. I came home from the pharmacy and I sat down at the kitchen table and I didn't say anything for a long time. Ivy came downstairs, looked at me once and said, "Grandpa, what happened?" Not a question. A statement she already knew something was wrong. I told her I was fine. She sat down across from me and waited. Ivy has always had this quality where she doesn't push, she just stays. She gets that from her mother. After maybe 10 minutes, I said, "I think your father took some money from me." She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised either, and that hurt in its own way. "How much?" she said. I told her. She closed her laptop and pushed it to the side and said, "Okay, show me the account." Ivy spent the next 2 hours at that kitchen table with my laptop and a phone, and a yellow legal pad she found in my desk drawer, She was asking me questions I didn't know the answers to. What email address did I have linked to that account? When did I last log in directly? Did I ever get a text confirmation when money moved? I'm not a man who struggles to admit what he doesn't know, but sitting there while my 16-year-old granddaughter walked me through my own financial records was humbling in a way I don't have the right word for. She found the transfer records. 3 separate transactions, each just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert from my bank. 22,000, 21,500, 20,500. Patrick had done his homework. He didn't just stumble onto this, Ivy said. She wasn't angry when she said it. She was just stating a fact. And that steadiness of hers was both a comfort and the saddest thing I'd seen in a long time. I called the bank first thing the next morning. The fraud department took my report and told me that because the transfers had been made using correctly authenticated credentials, recovery wasn't guaranteed. They opened an investigation. They told me to contact local police and file a report, which I did. Though the officer who took my statement was kind but honest with me. Civil disputes between family members, he said, were complicated. He didn't say unlikely. But I heard it anyway. What I didn't know, what nobody told me until much later, was that Ivy had already done something else. The night I called the bank, after I'd gone to bed, she'd gone through Patrick's old room. She wasn't snooping. She was looking. There's a difference. And she knew exactly what she was looking for. Patrick had left in a hurry and hadn't taken everything. In the nightstand drawer, she found a prepaid Visa card still in its packaging and a handwritten note with a name and a phone number on it. She photographed everything with her phone. The name on that note was a man I'll call by his nickname because that's all Ivy ever heard him referred to as Dex. Later I'd find out his full name, but it doesn't matter for this story. What mattered was that Dex was the person Patrick had been spending his days with since he lost the warehouse job. Dex had 2 prior fraud convictions in 2 different states. He was the one who had shown Patrick how the threshold transfers worked. Ivy didn't tell me any of this right away. She said later she didn't want to give me something I couldn't act on. She wanted to have the full picture first. She called Renee, told her everything. Renee, to her credit, immediately got in touch with a cousin of hers who had retired from the county sheriff's office and knew how to connect the right dots. By the time I found out what Ivy had set in motion, it was already moving. 3 weeks passed. I'll be honest, those 3 weeks were some of the loneliest of my life, and I've had a few lonely stretches. My wife Helen passed 8 years ago. I know what it is to be alone in a house that used to have someone else in it. But this was different. This was a specific kind of cold that comes from realizing the person you trusted most has been lying to your face. I kept going through the ordinary motions. Made coffee in the morning, fed the dog, watched the news, paid what bills I could with what was left in my checking. My cardiologist called about scheduling a follow-up, and I told his office I'd call back. I didn't call back. Ivy stayed an extra week, which she arranged herself. She called Renee, explained something had come up, and Renee didn't ask too many questions. Ivy made dinner most nights. She'd coming from school and just start pulling things out of the refrigerator like it was the most natural thing, and I'd sit at the kitchen counter and talk to her about her day, and for an hour or so things felt almost manageable. One evening, she sat down across from me with 2 cups of tea and said, "I want to tell you something, but I need you to let me finish before you react." I said, "Okay." She told me everything. The note, the name, the phone call to Renee, the retired officer, the investigation that had been quietly running parallel to mine. I sat with that for a long moment. "You did all that," I said without telling me. "I knew you'd try to handle it yourself," she said. "And I knew that wouldn't work as well." She wasn't wrong. I would have called Patrick directly. I would have given him the chance to explain himself, and he would have talked me into waiting, and the money would have gotten further away. I know myself. The call came on a Wednesday. Not from Ivy, not from Renee's cousin. From a detective at the county level who had been working the fraud angle. Patrick and Dex had been moving the money through a series of short-term accounts with the intention of eventually converting it into cryptocurrency. They hadn't gotten that far yet. 61,000 and some change was still recoverable, frozen pending the outcome of the case. Patrick was arrested at motel in Clarksburg. I don't know what to do with that sentence, so I'm just going to leave it there. The detective told me I should have my attorney contact the DA's office, which I did. I don't have an attorney on retainer. I'm a retired county worker, not a man with a legal team. But my neighbor's daughter-in-law is a family law attorney, and she made some calls on my behalf. I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes after I hung up with the detective. I didn't cry. I don't know why. I think there's a kind of grief that lives past tears, where the body just goes very quiet because it's used up everything it had. Here's what nobody tells you about having your child arrested. People expect you to feel relieved or angry or vindicated. And maybe other people do feel those things. What I felt was a very specific sorrow, the kind that doesn't have anything to do with the money, and everything to do with the 41 years I spent being that man's father. I thought about Patrick's 8th birthday. We'd had a party in the backyard, hot dogs and a store-bought cake, and he'd gotten a baseball glove he'd been asking for since April. He wore it to bed that night. I remember standing in the doorway of his room, watching him sleep with that glove on his hand, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. I thought about that a lot in the weeks after the arrest. Ivy came with me to the first meeting with the attorney. She sat there with her legal pad, same yellow one from the kitchen table, and took notes on things I missed. When I stumbled over explaining the timeline, she filled in the gaps. At 16 years old, she was steadier in that office than I was at 67. The attorney told us the recovery process would take time. Potentially 6 months to a year before the funds cleared back to me, depending on how the criminal case moved. She was straightforward about that, and I respected her for it. I don't want to be managed. I want to know what I'm actually dealing with. Patrick called me from the county jail about 2 weeks after the arrest. I almost didn't pick up. I sat there watching the number on my phone screen. The jail's number, not his. Because they always call from the facility line, and I thought about what Helen would have told me to do. Helen was not a soft woman. People who didn't know her well thought she was because she was quiet. But Helen had a spine of iron. She used to say that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the other person, and that it doesn't obligate you to hand the other person a key to your house. I picked up. Patrick said he was sorry. He said it 3 or 4 times in the first 30 seconds, and I let him. And then he said he'd been in a bad place, that Dex had convinced him it was a victimless thing, that the money would just be borrowed and I'd never notice. I'd never notice. Like $64,000 in a medical account was something a man doesn't keep track of. I didn't yell at him. I don't have the energy for yelling anymore. I just said, Patrick, I want you to understand something. The money is one thing. But I'm 67 years old and I have a heart condition, and the money I put in that account was for a surgery I may need to stay alive. That's what you took. There was a long silence on the line. I didn't know about the surgery, he said. No, I said, you didn't ask. The criminal case is still moving through the courts as I'm telling you this. Patrick has a public defender. Dex had a prior record, so his situation is more complicated, and I don't follow it closely because it costs me too much energy. What I can tell you is that the civil recovery process worked. $59,800 came back to me in 2 stages over the course of the following year. Not everything, and the $4,000 I didn't get back was the price of a lesson I should have learned years earlier. Never give anyone access to an account they didn't help you build. I changed all my account information. I set up a secondary notification system, and any transaction over $500 requires a confirmation code that goes to my phone, and to Ivy's, with her permission. She set that up herself and offered before I could ask. That's who she is. My cardiologist scheduled the follow-up. We're monitoring. The surgery may still be coming, or maybe it won't be necessary for several more years. The doctor says I'm doing better than my chart suggests, which he attributes to the fact that I walk the dog every morning and don't drink. I'd like to think Helen's cooking for all those years had something to do with it too. I won't tell you that I've forgiven Patrick completely because I'm not sure what that would even mean yet. I talked to him. He's allowed supervised visits with Ivy, and she goes because she decided to, not because anyone told her to. That girl has more wisdom about how to hold complicated things than most adults I've ever met. What I will tell you is this. There is a thing that happens when you've been betrayed by someone you loved, where you start to lose faith in your own judgment. You think, if I couldn't see this coming from my own son, what else am I missing? What else am I blind to? That's a dangerous place to live, and I spent some time there. Ivy pulled me out of it, not by saying anything particular. She didn't give me a speech. She's not that kind of kid. She just kept showing up. She'd drive out on weekends. She'd call on Tuesday evenings for no reason other than to check in. She'd ask about the dog and about what I'd been watching on TV and whether I'd eaten a real meal that day. One Saturday in March, she showed up with a casserole dish and announced she was teaching me to make chicken and rice soup, which had been Helen's recipe, one that Ivy had apparently memorized at some point without telling anyone. We stood at that stove for 2 hours, and she walked me through every step. And at the end, we sat down and ate it together, and I didn't say anything for a long time because I couldn't. "Grandpa," she said. "I know," I said. She nodded, and we didn't need to say anything else. I don't know what I did to deserve that girl. I really don't. But I'm going to spend whatever years I've got left making sure she knows that what she did, not just the legal piece of it, not just the phone calls and the notes and the detective, but the staying, the just staying, that is the thing that kept me standing. Some people think that wisdom belongs to the old, that the longer you've lived, the more you understand. I'm here to tell you that a 16-year-old girl taught me more about loyalty in one winter than I'd learned in the 67 years before it. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what I actually learned from all of it. Not the tidy version you tell other people, but the real one. The one that stays with you at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and the dog is asleep at your feet. Here's what I keep coming back to. Patrick didn't become someone who could do this overnight. There were smaller things over the years, borrowed money that came back late, explanations that didn't quite add up, promises that dissolved quietly when nobody was watching. I told myself each time that it was a rough patch, that he'd find his footing. What I was really doing was choosing comfort over honesty. And that choice has a cost. It always does. Not as punishment from somewhere outside yourself, but as a simple, mechanical consequence. When you don't deal with a problem directly, it grows. That's not philosophy. That's just how things work. What broke the pattern wasn't me. It was Ivy. And what I keep thinking about is this. Ivy didn't do what she did because she's some extraordinary person who fell out of the sky. She did it because somewhere along the way she developed the 3 things that actually matter in a crisis. She knew right from wrong and didn't flinch from it, even when the person in the wrong was her own father. That's not easy at 16. That's not easy at any age. But she had a moral center that held when everything around it was unstable. She didn't rationalize. She didn't wait for someone else to take responsibility. She just looked at what was true and acted on it. She also had the kind of mind that goes looking for answers instead of sitting in the problem. While I was staring at a bank statement, feeling like the ground had dropped out, she was at the kitchen table with a legal pad, thinking 3 steps ahead. Intelligence isn't just about school grades. It's about how you use what you know when the stakes are real. She used it well. And then there's the part that gets me most. She stayed. Not because anyone asked her to, not because it was convenient, but because she decided it mattered and she followed through on that decision for months. That's something different from being smart or being good. That's backbone. That's the willingness to keep showing up even when it's hard and quiet and unrewarding and nobody's watching. I'm 67 years old. I thought I knew what shaped a person. But watching Ivy move through those months taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. That the people who actually hold things together in a crisis are the ones who have all three of those things working at the same time. Not just good intentions, not just intelligence, not just toughness. All three together pointed at something that matters. I lost some money. I gained something harder to name but worth considerably more. I'm still working out what to do with Patrick. Maybe I'll be working on that for the rest of my life. But Ivy, she showed me what a person can be when they're built right from the inside out, and I plan to spend whatever time I've got left being worthy of what she gave me.